Welcome to How We Get Through, the podcast where we share stories, mental health insights, and healing advice on life's everyday challenges. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder of the How We Get Through app. Today's guest is Kristine Page, a licensed clinical counselor and certified perinatal mental health therapist from Kansas. See what happens when two moms who happen to be therapists talk about their birth trauma, depression and anxiety in postpartum, and of course, the power of validating our own birth stories. Get ready for an honest and raw conversation about birth trauma and the scariest thoughts that we can experience in the postpartum period. And of course, how we get through all of that. Take a listen. Hi, and welcome back to the How We Get Through podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and today's guest is Kristine Page, a licensed clinical professional counselor with a private practice in Kansas, and is also a certified perinatal mental health therapist, right? Yes. Kristine helps people get through the perinatal period, from trying to conceive to raising tiny humans. She also is a pandemic mom, shout out, whoop whoop, and having her first and only child during January 2020. She's also gone through birth trauma and had her son in the NICU for 5 weeks, and also is a member of the postpartum depression group. So, yes, welcome, Kristine. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes. So we like to start every show off with a mental health myth, and I am sure there's a ton to pick from on this subject of postpartum emotions and just the postpartum period. So we would love to know yours.
Absolutely. And I'm not a follower of rules, so I have like two.
Perfect.
I think a huge one is that dealing with postpartum emotions or being diagnosed with postpartum depression or anxiety makes you a bad parent, or that you don't love your child.
Ooh, say that again for the people in the back.
Right? Yes.
Wow.
I think it's just that shame and guilt that comes along with dealing with those things during a very trying time. And I just hear that so many times from moms and parents that they're just like, must mean I'm a bad mom, I can't do this right, those types of things. And so I think to my second one, piggyback on that one, is that postpartum depression or anxiety can be prevented.
Ooh.
I have a lot of moms who say, well, if I would have done this in my pregnancy, I wouldn't have had this issue, or if I could have done this, no.
Yeah.
You can't.
I think what you're kind of like summing up is this theme of motherhood where we blame ourselves for everything. And I mean, we have a lot of responsibility, right? Like, it kind of makes sense. Like, I am the one. I am growing. I'm feeding. I am the anxious one. I'm the like attached one, or not attached, right? But the sole provider, it feels like, majority of the time.
Absolutely. I think the responsibility of parenting comes a lot onto the mother. One, you're growing the human. You're giving birth to the human, you're doing all the things, you might be feeding the human, like the responsibility is all on you. So then whatever you're struggling with, or, whatever's not going right, clearly is your fault. And I think also you're already in a very vulnerable state postpartum, or even throughout pregnancy. And so it just makes sense why we go straight to like self-blaming ourselves for everything that's going on. My thoughts, it must mean that I have these terrible thoughts about my child dying, or, about me dying, and so clearly there's something wrong with me and it's my fault and I should have done something.
Yes. The should word, the big
should. I always say, don't say should, no shoulds.
Yeah, no shoulds around here.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. And part of you in becoming a therapist, did you have your postpartum experience before that, after that? What's your childhood trauma that made you a therapist?
I love it. I love it. I always love that, like, they always told us in grad school, there's 3 reasons you become a therapist. 1, you want to heal yourself through this program, which is not going to happen. 2, you've been to therapy before and now you want to help other people. Or 3, like, you might just be a good person and you want to help people. And they're like, that's a pretty rarity.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But I actually wanted to be a therapist since I was in like high school. So
Crazy.
weird, odd. I don't know how we had this peer helper program. So peers could come to you and talk through problems if they didn't feel comfortable talking to our counselor at our school. So we had like training. It was super cool. Actually, like, so my high school counselor, like, now we're colleagues and friends because she kind of, it's super awesome. So shout out to Mrs. Klein. And she, it was just a cool experience to like really help people who are same age as you, going through similar things to you. So I've been a therapist for over 10 years. I actually started working with kids, and my naive little therapist self was like, I'm never working with adults. And you're dumb because you're dealing with kids, so you have to deal with their parents. But I loved littles. I loved, so I'm also a registered play therapist. So loved all the creativity, all the fun stuff. Worked community mental health for most of my career. And then I started working at a child advocacy center. So I worked with kids who had experienced trauma, primarily sexual abuse. And needless to say, that took a toll. That was such rewarding work, but it was a lot. It was a lot. And my journey to working with adults kind of started there. I was just seeing that, I was seeing these kids for 1 hour a week, maybe every other week, and they just kept going back into these environments that were just not helpful for them. And so I actually started being the parent therapist. And so I started some support groups and just, most of these parents had their own childhood trauma. So we were trying to help them through that. They were fully triggered by their children now having trauma. So kind of from there, I was like, oh, okay, adults aren't as bad as I thought they were.
You naturally found your way back to them in a sense. For the children.
Absolutely, yes. So I feel like it's a full circle experience.
Which is like humanity,
Absolutely.
Which is suffering, which is the human experience, is that we are all connected and we are all impacting each other on so many different levels. And so it's even interesting, like, we kind of break it up as in the field, and there are specialties like children and adults, but we're so multifaceted, right? It's
Absolutely. Like, you have to be.
To be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, so then after that, I'm kind of burnt out. So I was like, well, I got to do something new. So started my private practice about 5 years ago. And trauma was really my niche. Never really looked at that in grad school as being my niche, but here we are, and I love it. And that's what people are always like, well, what do you work with? And I'm like, trauma. And they're like, oh, and you get those like responses, and I'm just like, but I love it. And they're like, that's weird. And I'm like, I know, but it's great all at the same time.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. You all have like some sort of level of trauma.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. If I'm a firm believer, like, we go to the root cause of a lot of things. There is something in your past. And I think that's the hardest part about trauma, is that people think it's like, has to be something so catastrophic, right? Like abuse, car accident, a house fire, death of someone. And so many people think that that's what it is. And so they're like, well, I don't have any of that stuff. And it's like, no, it's so much more than that. It is our body's response to something unexpected. That is the easiest way I can put it, because it's just how our body responds, and a lot of times people are like, well, I know that was significant, but I don't think about it. I'm like, well, your body does. Your body remembers it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So that's always super interesting to have those conversations with people who are just like, no, I don't have any childhood trauma. Like, I'm good. And
Always as a therapist, you're like, oh no,
yeah. After a couple of sessions with me, they're like, oh, darn.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's part of like the mind's response too, of like protection in some way. And it takes like, I think that's what therapy is, but another skilled human that can hold space of like pulling that forward to consciousness when they're ready, because they know deep and down like something's not resolved and something is still there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it usually comes about in times when you're feeling stress or maybe experienced another trauma, and you're trying, I know people don't like the word triggered, but you're triggered by,
all the time.
I know, but your body is like, oh, I remember this, like I have felt this before, and we just brushed it aside because we didn't have maybe the skills or the knowledge of what that is. So, we did what we had to do then, and now, crap, I gotta like hit it head on and look at it and deal with it and process it and try to help it.
Yeah. Almost kind of reminds me of, or maybe not reminds me, but it's like a reminder, I should say, of like, we want to be really safe as children and be able to be like our own healers. And we have such power to do that as an adult. Like there's like free reign, like freedom, or everything's possible, or you can be your own healer in that. And we have like the bandwidth to do it where we don't as a child,
Totally. Absolutely. And I think it's a lot of my work with adult trauma survivors. So granted, even if their trauma was more in adulthood and not in childhood, like we're still talking about the child self, like, that hurt child that lives inside of you, you're also healing them along with healing yourself as an adult. And that's a process, and that it's not just, hey, teach me some skills and let's get out of here. It's like really doing some of that heavy work. And some people, and I always tell people, like, some people aren't ready for that, and that's okay. Like, I think some people are like, well, I had this traumatic experience, or my child did, or somebody, they need to get into therapy right away. And I'm just like, yes, they need support, but it might not be their time to process that. It takes time, and they have to be ready to process that. And I think my personal experience kind of got me to that point too, of just like, you have to be ready to really dive in and feel all the feelings and think all the things in order to heal from it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great segue into like birth trauma. Like, what the hell is birth trauma? We all experience it on some level again, right? And did that kind of like catapult you in this different direction? And what was that like?
100% to all of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was a trauma therapist. But just because we're a trauma therapist, we don't always recognize our own trauma. So yeah, my kiddo, he was born at 32 weeks, in January of 2020. I had an emergency C-section. I had preeclampsia and HELLP syndrome. So I was not doing well. He was fine. He was healthy. I was not. So had to get him out. He was 3 pounds and just this little nugget guy. But yeah, so we spent 5 weeks in the NICU. So I'm recovering from a C-section and having to go to the NICU, and like, we hadn't even had my baby shower, like the room wasn't ready, like all the things. And here we have a baby, and we're just like, what? Like, we weren't ready. We were not ready. I didn't even have a hospital bag. Like, I had a bag, I bought a bag, and my husband, I was like, go home and get the bag. And he goes, babe, there's like nothing in it. I'm like, I know, because I don't have anything. I don't have all the things. So yeah, we, sometimes I look back and I'm like, gosh, maybe I should have, started working on myself when he was in the NICU, because I just sat in his room for 12 hours a day, just holding him and feeding him, and, I didn't really have much of like the outside world, but at the same time, I was just surviving. Like, my entire thought was just, I got to get this baby home. Whatever I got to do to get him home. now looking back, I'm like, ooh, we could have stayed in the NICU a little longer because like once you come home, it's like the real
Scarier.
Yeah. It's way scarier.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were in the NICU. We're blessed. He was very healthy. He just needed to grow and learn how to eat and, do all the things.
How were you?
How was I in the NICU?
And physically, like, how did you, like, what were the signs? Did your water break? How did you know you needed to go?
Yeah, I went into preterm labor. Had no idea it was preterm labor. TMI, I literally thought it was like poop. I had like this stomach thing all week and I wasn't eating a ton. And so I was like, babe, my stomach really hurts. And he's like, well, sit on the toilet for a little bit. And I'm like, okay. And then I started recording. I still have the note on my phone that says like stomach pain. And it has like every 7 minutes, I keep getting this stomach pain and still like,
my gosh.
I don't know, mom brain, whatever you want to call it. I was just like, what is this? And I'm like, and so we called the on-call doctor and they're like, well, you're having contractions. And I'm like, well, no, I can't be. I'm 32 weeks. I literally the day before had a healthy 32-week checkup. Everything was good. My heart rate, my blood pressure, baby's heart rate, everything was fine. So I was like, no, this is not. So they're like, well, just come in and, maybe it's just, I'd had Braxton Hicks. So I was like, well, maybe it's just that. I was scared, but I wasn't like, we're going to have a baby in the next 12 hours. So went in and they're like, oh, no, you are here. You're being admitted. We're going to try to stop these contractions, but your blood pressure is through the roof and your liver and kidneys are not functioning very well.
Wow.
And so we're going to start, you get the steroid shot to help try to develop the baby's lungs. So if they are born early that, hopefully they won't have too many respiratory issues. So I think I got one shot. And then you get what's called magnesium, which anybody who's had preeclampsia or blood pressure issues, they give it to you so that you don't have seizures. And that is hell. Absolutely hell.
How do they give it to you?
IV.
Okay.
You feel like you're burning from the inside out.
Oh.
Wow. Headaches, like, I think that's kind of where my body went into like survival mode because I don't remember much after that for probably the next like 36 hours, which is really terrible. So that's kind of where I feel like my birth trauma really started.
Yeah.
It's funny, so we got to the hospital around midnight. They come in 9 a.m. and they're like, baby's got to go. Like, we got to get baby out. You're not getting better. You're getting worse. And, your contractions are not stopping. So, they're having me sign all this paperwork. And I'm like, I would love to see those signatures today because I was not in my right mind to be signing all these, things. But, so C-section, I, part of my kind of processing my birth trauma, a big thing they say is to go back and kind of look through your medical records because you don't remember a lot of what happened. And I will say that's a blessing and a curse. One, I get to kind of put some of the pieces of the puzzle back together. But the other part is you learn some things that you don't really want to learn. So I learned that his heart rate so they're moving me from the bed to the OR table. Again, naive little pregnant me. I was like, I think I just peed. And they're like, no, honey, like you have a catheter in, your water just broke. And I was like, okay.
That sensation before, or
no
like in labor before.
Yes.
So it's like, you don't know.
I had no idea any of these things. They don't prepare you for any of this. You have no idea what any of this is.
Sensation-wise.
Yeah. So soon after that, his heart rate started to drop. And so I still remember, and this was something I had to process in my therapy was, I just remember the doctors having this nonchalant conversation. I don't even remember what they were talking about, but they were just talking about random shit. And I was just remember feeling like this rage inside of me, like, this is the worst day of my life. And you're just having this casual conversation. But now when kind of the blessing of looking through my medical records was, okay, they have a sick mom and they have a potentially sick baby. And so maybe that was their way of coping.
Yeah.
You know, like, I got to get this baby out. So let's not freak out. Let's talk about the weather. I don't even remember what they were talking about. I just remember being so pissed off about it.
During this section?
Yeah. Like, I just remember being super aware of that. Like, of all things,
you're behind the curtain and they're just...
Yeah.
So,
they would casually say, like, okay, hey, you're going to have some pressure. You're going to, feel all these things. And I was just like, I'm just mad at you. Like, please, anyways, get my son out. And I still remember my husband, God bless his soul. He has to go to the bathroom often, always, usually at inopportune times. He almost missed.
Poop, like a nervous poop?
No, like pee. Nervous pee. He's going to love that I shared this.
All right, yeah.
He was in the bathroom and they're like, Dad, get in here. And he almost missed, my son being bored.
Oh,
and literally he was like, what? And I was like, babe, he's over there. Like, look, he's over there. He's out. And I will say the one thing I don't remember, but I have pictures and I'm so thankful that my husband had his phone on him. Before they took him to the NICU, we had a little special moment where he kind of opened his hand and I was, he grabbed onto my finger.
Gosh, stop.
Yeah, I know. It's my favorite picture ever. I look atrocious, but it is the moment, I didn't get the skin on skin. I didn't get that golden hour. I didn't get I didn't get a lot of things. So to have that's my skin on skin.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that very much.
Yeah.
But, so then
special.
I went to recovery and I don't remember anything.
And they took him right away to the NICU.
Took him right away. He was not breathing.
You knew? Okay.
Yes. We knew that he was going to the NICU.
Okay.
They said even if he is breathing on his own, he will still go to the NICU. But he was not breathing on his own. So they put him in this little, like, it looks like, what you put a turkey in, like the bag you put a turkey in. That's what they put him in.
A turkey bag?
Like a turkey bag. That's what I always say. It looks like a little turkey in a bag. I think it's just to help with their temperature.
Okay.
Before they get him up to the isolate in the NICU. So like all his poor little like first pictures are just all these, there's one where his like arms and legs are like strapped down so that they can get all the stuff on him. And like, it's just these really sad pictures, but he was healthy. He had some oxygen things going on, but, eventually he got off of those. But, it was not anything I expected, which I think that's another big piece of birth for everyone is that I would say the more people now that I'm in this working with perinatal women is just the more and more stories I hear. Nobody has a perfect birthing experience. There are so many more things that are complicated and that can provide birth trauma. So, birth trauma can be, a preterm labor. It can be a NICU experience. It can be, unfortunately, there's a lot of practitioner violations, things that happen with doctors or nurses or, just there's hemorrhaging. There's, it can be something that happens to your baby. It can be something that happens to you. There's a plethora, unfortunately, of things that can be birth trauma.
Which is like, has it always, like from the dawn of time, like childbirthing is dangerous?
Absolutely. Yeah? Absolutely. I just think that we now put, and I don't want to say label, but we now talk about it. We talk about it being traumatic instead of like, oh, you're a woman and your body's supposed to do this. And so like your body knows what to do. Oh, I hate that.
Man, that's so good. That is so good. I mean, I feel like that's like a big mental health myth around
Absolutely.
around the birthing process of like, and that's where it starts of like, oh, I must be missing something or I must be broken somehow. If my body is not responding in the way nature intended or whatever the hell people want to say.
Yes.
Oh, I feel that deep. Yeah.
And then I think it's easy to have that blame and shame and guilt when something does go wrong, when your body doesn't do it the right way. I think if you would poll, and I'm sure there's a statistic out there of, how many women had a quote unquote like normal, perfect birthing experience, I think the percentage would be a lot lower than I think we would think it would be. And I think it's happened for many years. It's just now people are actually talking about it.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah. That's so good. I had 2 C-sections. My first was breech, and they're like, I tried to turn her, which was also traumatic. They have to you have to be in the hospital, and it's like 2 doctors physically trying to push the baby. I was like, how are we still doing this? But I was like, I want a vaginal birth, like I'm going to have a vaginal unmedicated birth. I don't know if I was unmedicated, but I was like, I want a vaginal birth.
That's it.
And I did it. And I never went into labor, and I never went into labor with my second one either. And I've had some nurses that, right before, they were like sweeping my membranes without me asking. And they're like, oh, the head's low. You're going to have a vaginal birth. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful. Right. But I was so scared to go VBAC. I was like, I don't know. It's just all messed up. And I ended up having a C-section, But I think it's just even that emotional piece, or what we're kind of tied to of what the ideal is, or the best mom decision is a natural vaginal birth with no trauma. No trauma. And it's just the music, we're in the bath. We are just doing it. I mean, it might be different. I'm in California, so everyone's like a little more hippy dip. But I think it is from the start is like your body knows what to do. This is the best way forward. And then when you don't have that experience, that's where the shame, it almost like starts creeping in automatically, right? Or if you're different than your friends or whatever it is. And birth is so unique. Like, I feel like just as the babies are unique in themselves, like your birth is so unique, and every mom will want to talk about their birth story, whether or not it was, great, sad, whatever the spectrum is. Like, as you were telling yours, like, I got to tell mine, you know what I mean? It's like, I got to because there's a shared experience there of like, oh, it wasn't like I expected either.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to share your birth story, because I think finding that connection, even if, initially I was like, oh, it's a lot of trauma. I don't know that I want to share all that stuff with people, because I don't want I don't want the comments, right? A lot of the comments are, oh, well, you're home and he's home and you're healthy now, so like everything's good. I'm like, hell no, it's not good.
Miss my trauma. Thank you. Yeah.
And not intentional, right? But like people are uncomfortable with other people's trauma. And I totally get that. I mean, I think being a trauma therapist, you're not uncomfortable with it. I'm used to it. And I bring it.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Give me more. But I think it's so important, because the more and more I've talked about it, the more and more people I've met, even just personally, not even professionally, that have had somewhat of a similar experience or something, even, some people are like, oh, my kid was in the NICU for a day. I was like, I don't care. Any NICU time. Yeah. That you didn't get to hold your baby right away, or, maybe I heard a story the other day, like the baby was fine, and then all of a sudden they're getting ready to go home and they're like, no, like his levels, something's off, like we're going to go take him to the NICU. And I'm like, that's traumatic, like I don't care what it looks like, and it doesn't matter. Right? And I think the problem is the comparison part, which is, mine's not as bad as someone else's, right? Doesn't matter. If it was traumatic to you, it's traumatic.
Yeah. It's almost like, again, I think going back to like you being the self-healer is you have to do a lot of work in validating and staying there. Like, I get to say, this was terrible for me, right? Instead of, I think sometimes we wait for other people to validate that and be like, oh, okay, right. That was fucked up, right? That was pretty bad, right? You know, like, and I think we do need that, but I just want to like kind of, if anyone's listening and they feel this or if they felt that, like you get to say, this was really, really hard. And it gets to end there and it gets to be there. And then you get to find people that you want to share that with that can hold that and not say, well, but blah, blah, blah. There's no buts. It just gets to be really hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I was there too, you know, because my baby was healthy and we were in the NICU and there were babies that were not healthy. And, you know, that was a huge blessing. He was healthy. He just needed to grow. But I think for me, a lot of what took me so long to get the help that I needed was because I said, we're healthy. We're home now. It's okay. Like, yeah, that sucks. And I don't wish that for anyone. We're fine now. So like almost telling myself, like, get over it. And so I also think too, like I came, my son was, we came home on Valentine's Day. And so soon after I was like reaching out to my therapist, which is another myth. Bust that myth. Therapists have therapists.
Yes.
There you go.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to myth bust throughout this.
I love it.
But, you know, I had processed what I thought I needed to process. Clearly there was more, but it really wasn't until my kiddo was 18 months before I truly realized that, like, I don't have to be struggling every day. I don't have to have this deep sadness or this rage or all these emotions that this isn't just motherhood. It was more. And I don't think I allowed myself to feel that because we were healthy, because we had gone through something traumatic and we're okay. You know, I didn't die. You didn't die. Like, we're okay. I still remember the moment took a road trip to Texas. Don't
with
do
an
that.
18-month-old?
With an 18-month-old. Don't do that. But it was the pandemic. So we were like, you want to get out of Kansas. I don't know if you've ever been to Kansas, but there's not much here. We wanted to get out. We wanted to explore. So we're like, let's drive to Texas and do that.
Okay.
But we got halfway and we're like, we're going to stop at a hotel. And, you know, so of course, babies go down early. So you have to have a dark room. And so you sit in the bathroom in a dark room. And I remember my husband went downstairs and, you know, just wanted to get away. And I just remember sitting there watching the monitor and just bawling and just like, this can't be motherhood. Like, the thing that I have been looking forward to since I was a little girl, like, this cannot be motherhood. Like, I love my child, but I'm struggling. I am just surviving. This cannot be it. And so it was really at that point that I was just like, I need to care for myself more. You know, you can't just keep going through the day-to-day stuff and just pushing it off as, well, you know, it's hard. It's hard having a kid. It's hard being in a pandemic. Yeah, everybody's struggling, right? Everybody's freaking out. It's scary. But it took that moment, along with my husband being like, I don't think you're okay.
Yeah.
I'm worried about you and I watch you and I make sure, you know, I'm worried. It took that to really be like, okay, I need more specialized help too. So that's really what got me into, I found a perinatal mental health therapist. And then I was just like, this has to be more talked about. Like, this has to be something that's more of a conversation, because even my friends who had had babies before me, it was not something we talked about. So that kind of just drove me into like, I've got to help other moms. Like, I don't want anybody, so many moms are going to experience this and they have to have resources. They have to have things, because it just doesn't have to look like this.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing your experience in that moment, because I think it's so powerful. And I think a lot of moms have felt that moment. I have a similar moment, but it was a little bit different. But it's still that feeling of like, did I miss something? Because this does not feel good. I can't get out of it. You know, that like cyclical, for me, was more anxiety of like, I can't even, like, my friends are at the front of my house. I can't go out there because my baby is like crying or whatever. Like it was just weird. It was so weird. Oh, I love everything about this. And I just really appreciate you being honest, and we can be honest about our birth stories and everything that happens.
We think that a lot of these experiences are common or normal, and yes, they can be, but there's always a level to where, okay, this is more than just surviving motherhood. And I think that's kind of where I got to, where it's just like, it doesn't have to be this huge struggle. I really wanted to just enjoy being a mom, and I tried, but it was difficult. It was something I really intensely had to do every day. And I was just like, I don't want to just have to enjoy it. I want to have that feeling. So I think when it came to resources, even being a therapist, I was like, I don't even know what to look for, right? Absolutely. This wasn't something we talked about in grad school. So where do I go? So now, I think because I'm in this field now, it's a lot of like, there's tons out there, but they're not out there to all the normal moms, right? So I think for me, it was reaching out to a perinatal mental health therapist.
How'd you find her?
Yeah, so I found her through Postpartum Support International. It is a wonderful organization. They have free virtual support groups.
Wow.
For anything under the sun you can think of. Moms, dads, adoptive parents, parenting after loss, NICU parents, LGBTQ and trans parents. They literally have one for anything you can think of, and they're free.
Wow.
Which is unheard of these days.
Yeah.
So I found her through there. And I truly just think her expertise of understanding what I was going through, and it wasn't just motherhood or sleep exhaustion, like it was postpartum depression. And it was just so nice to have that validation.
And she just diagnosed you in that? Like what did that look like? Did she give you the questionnaire? Did she?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think a lot of things, and, just interviewing me, what are my symptoms? What am I feeling? Of course, can't think of the life of me what the questionnaire is, but there is a perinatal depression inventory, that, how are you? Do you feel this every day? Somewhat. And, I remember her in our session just being like, you have postpartum depression. And I was just like, I don't know why I was so shocked by it, because I had said it to myself multiple times, but I was like, no, it's not that. Like, it's just, this is hard. And when she said it, it was just like, I felt like I could finally take a breath and just be like, okay, I can acknowledge what this is now, and then I can start working on it, and I can start helping myself. And at that point I was like, well, what do I do? I help people all the time with depression, but like, how do I do this? And it was a lot of just processing what I was feeling. I did EMDR therapy with her. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Super long name, but really it's the idea that like when we experiencing something traumatic, and those emotions just get stuck. Our brain doesn't fully process them because of the stress we endured. And so we just get stuck in this mindset, and this piece of our experience gets stuck. And we really just have to reprocess that in a more logical way. We're not in that fight or flight response at that moment. So our brain can process it differently and start to like really I envision our brain just being a big filing cabinet. And when we're processing experiences and memories, you know, a fun memory, right? Like a fun vacation gets processed really easily, right? A traumatic one, it's fragmented. It's all over the place. And so EMDR to me is really just being able to finally file that piece away in the way that it needs to be. It doesn't get rid of it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it puts it in a place that we can, if it is recalled, you know, we're able to see it maybe not as intensely as we had before. So that was a huge part of my healing process on top of medication. I'm a huge advocate for utilizing all the resources. And medication was just the thing that also just, I felt more like myself again. I was so heightened in so many areas that I truly felt like the medication just put me at a level that I could then really start to process all of the things. So yeah, I think because it was COVID, there wasn't a lot of, virtual things were there, but it wasn't as much as it is now, which I'm so thankful we finally have that. So I didn't really have like mommy and me stuff or,
the community aspect.
Those support, just that kind of natural, organic support that comes from being around other moms. So I do think that was a piece of my depression too, just that isolation. Like you said, motherhood is already such an isolating experience, but just to add on top COVID. And so, yeah, any pandemic moms out there who have, I think any parent who's had to parent through a pandemic, we didn't know what to do. You didn't know what the right answer was. And here you are just trying to like keep your children and yourself healthy and safe. And that was a stressor that none of us were prepared for.
Yeah. I think a good point. Like you have a newborn and you don't want them getting sick. And there's this, whatever this is, we don't know where it is. And it was just like terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. Yeah.
Did you do your EMDR virtually or in person?
Virtually.
Okay, great. Did you tap yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there, I am also an EMDR therapist too. So which I do, I love it. Could talk your ear off about all the science and brain stuff all day long. But yeah, so you can tapping yourself. So the butterfly hug, this is called. This can also be utilized for a lot of just grounding work and reducing some of that anxiety. But there's also now, of course, tons of virtual things you can do. So in the basics of EMDR is bilateral stimulation. So you're wanting to go back and forth from the emotional side to the logic side. And so doing that is the original creation of it is eye movement. So therapists used to sit like this with their hand and go back and forth, and that is bilateral stimulation. Thank goodness for people always evolving. There's so many different things now. There's light bars, there's tappers, so you can hold those and you'll get a vibration in each hand. When I worked with kiddos, I'd put them in their socks. And then you can also, like, I used to have kids like color back and forth. That's bilateral stimulation. There's music now. You can YouTube bilateral stimulation music. That can be incredibly calming for any parent who's overwhelmed by parenting. Sit and YouTube bilateral stimulation music. It's not about the processing part. That's not what, I don't recommend you doing that on your own. I recommend you seeking out an EMDR therapist, but
for the grounding.
You can do it for grounding.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful. Super. But it can also be used in processing with a therapist as well.
Yes. Oof. I love that. And as we were talking about, so we're mainly talking in your experience feels postpartum depression. When we were doing the course, we were thinking of like piecing them out like postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, and we didn't. And can you tell me why we didn't do that?
Yes. I think there's a lot of reasons. But I think because there are so many emotions that women birthing people feel after their experience. And this little insert is that this can also happen to spouses, dads, adoptive parents, surrogacy. It can happen to anybody. So that's always a big piece, that it's not just the birthing person. But I think we didn't want to just say depression or anxiety because there's a gamut. And I think it's easily to just be like, well, I don't have, postpartum depression, right? But I'm feeling this way. And to normalize that and validate that those are normal feelings. So, sadness happens often, right? We've got a ridiculous amount of hormones coming, going, all the things. Our brains are actually changing too, which is, again, my sciencey, like, brain stuff that I just freaking love. But there are research that now shows that, like, you can decipher between a woman's brain who has had a child and just a woman's brain who has not had a child.
Wow. They really change us in multiple ways.
On the inside and the outside.
Yeah, seriously. Wow.
So, like, though that was just the part of it, that there's just so many different things that could be going on, that just to say depression or anxiety, it just felt it wasn't reaching everybody. We wanted to reach and normalize a lot of those experiences.
Yeah. And I think they're almost like interrelated in that it's the spectrum of like the hyper and the hypo, right? Like hyper is anxiety, hypo is depression. And they are, I think in my experience, I would feel anxiety more anxious than would lead to sadness. Like they are just so interconnected that it is hard to kind of pinpoint something because it just all feels overwhelming and all so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, like you said too, like, some people's, the anxiety is more profound, right? So you don't always see the underlying depression side of things. I mean, some people truly just have the anxiety symptoms and not the depression. And I think that's what's kind of confusing to people sometimes too. So it was just, it's so important to the overwhelming feelings, right? Like, I think every mother knows they're going to feel overwhelmed, right? I'm sleep deprived. My body has completely changed. I'm trying to figure this all out. I think the biggest thing I learned was motherhood is trial and error. Like, you literally are trying things and you're going to fail probably more than you succeed. But you just keep trying and you figure it out. And just because your best friend did this with their kid doesn't mean that's going to work for your kiddo. Every kiddo is different. Every situation is different. You can take advice, but it doesn't mean it's going to work. And that can be frustrating. It can be overwhelming. How do I do all these things? So just the feelings that come along with it, the thoughts that come along with it. I think that's a big piece too that could literally just be its own course of those intrusive thoughts that are so common and are so scary.
Yeah.
So scary.
Yeah.
That you're just like, what is happening? I've never experienced this before. Maybe you have in some way, shape, or form, but thinking of like, okay, now I'm caring for a baby and I've got these thoughts, things like, I'm going to drop my baby. I'm going to walk down these stairs and I'm going to drop my baby. And sometimes you have visions of what that would look like. And you're just like, that can't be normal, right? It's normal. And I know that sucks to hear that, right? But it
feels great,
Or it feels great. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's those scary, intrusive thoughts are so normal, And I think the biggest distinction I wanted to make in the course too is just like, what's common postpartum thoughts, feelings that are going on, and where is that line where it's like, this is more than just some of those common reactions.
Which I think was just, I mean, it's such a powerful piece of knowledge because motherhood is so unknown that you're trying to be prepared as much as possible. But it's almost like a mixture of like, okay, here's the education and here's the line, but also where am I on that line? You know, and I think it calls for us to be compassionate and honest, but then also for our community or our partners to also call that out, which I know has been your experience in that. But it's, I think it was just so important of here's the normal and here's the line. Like I just keep coming back to that because we hear horror stories. What we hear are the extremes. And then we hear the other extreme of like, oh, I didn't feel anything at all, or I never had that or anything. And so there's this whole wide range where we're not capturing because it's not newsworthy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. I never really thought of it that way, but that's exactly what it is. I think it's a spectrum. And yeah, the quote unquote beautiful, perfect, I call it the like movie-esque birthing experience, is what you think is supposed to happen. And then, media gives us, unfortunately, the other side of things, which at the same time, I'm also really happy that we're also talking about that too, because that's so important to be aware of too. I think there's so much going on when you're about to become a mom, right? You're thinking about, got to have all the things, am I going to go back to work? We got the nursery set up, like what is this? What are our roles going to look like? Things like that like, I think it's very easy to think about like, how am I going to feel after all of this? What am I going to go through? I mean, I think we've got the bouncing back culture, like the women that bounce right back. I hate that.
Yeah.
But, so I think it's like, okay, well, how am I going to get my pre-baby body back? Or, like we're not always thinking about the mental health side of things, maybe because we haven't dealt with mental health things before, but it's such an important piece of the motherhood journey is also recognizing the vast amount of changes that are going on and how are you going to respond to those things. And I think that comes with more knowledge prior to having a baby. So like, I'm so thankful for you creating this app and doing all this, because I think it's just getting that more knowledge out there and normalizing it. So it's not such a scary thing to have to think about. But I honestly, looking back, I would have rather had more knowledge so that I could have been more aware of what I was experiencing. Would it have changed things? I don't know. I can't go back, but I just know that once I was aware of what was going on for myself, and I find that with my clients too, that once I can validate it for them, they're just like, oh, that makes sense. I'm not going crazy. I'm not losing my mind. I'm feeling what's common. And maybe it was baby blues to begin with, which is, what lasts for about 2 weeks after giving birth, which is, sadness, kind of irritability, just all those hormone changes are going on. But after that 2 weeks, still feeling that sadness. Again, I think rage is something, the anger and rage part is something people don't like to talk about because it's uncomfortable and it's not motherhood-like. I don't know.
A rager. So
same.
Yeah.
Again, something I was just like, why do I have so much anger at everyone?
Yeah.
Everything.
Yep. Burn it all down. Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing is like, how much is that interfering with your everyday life? And that's the question I want anyone to ask themselves. Like, if I'm feeling this sadness, if I'm feeling this anger, if I'm having these intrusive thoughts, how much is that interfering with my daily functioning? Can I not walk my baby down the stairs anymore because I keep thinking of them falling down the stairs? So I either don't go upstairs anymore, or I sit on my butt and, creep down the stairs with my baby every time. And that goes on for months. Those are things that you don't have to keep struggling with.
Yeah. I think that's a really good example. When you were talking, I just got kind of a flashback, as we do, with my first baby. She lost, we took her home. We had a C-section. She wasn't in the NICU. We took her home, and then they come back like 2 days later, 3 days later, whatever, I don't know, for a checkup. She lost a lot of weight, and she really wasn't feeding well. And I was breastfeeding, which I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I remember the doctor telling me that, and I like bursted out in tears. And she's like, I don't even know what she said to me, but it felt so awful. She was like, are you experiencing, I don't know. She just kind of was like, she was like kind of like telling me I had postpartum depression. And I was like, I felt like I had to suck it up too, because I was like, I don't know what I have, but you just told me I'm not feeding my baby. So me crying gets to be normal. Like me being so sad that I wasn't feeding my baby and making me feel terrible gets to be normal. So it was just this like weird, I think I have like a lot of great people that I know that are OBs, and they are skilled in what they do, and they are getting more knowledge into all of the perinatal mental health disorder stuff. But there's, I think, just some pieces where we can kind of pick up as mothers of like, oh, there's another reason that I have to like kind of be normal in this situation, or I can't be something, or I guess that fear, right, of like postpartum depression, like, oh, I don't have that. Like I'm just like, my baby's not gaining weight, which is an important thing. So I think, again, like what I'm really trying to do, I mean, with the app, but with everything, and I think is like, this purpose is to catch that middle. And because that middle of that scale is so broad, and we are experiencing it on this like grand scale, and we need to be talking about it more, even again, if it's not newsworthy, because It's important.
Absolutely. And it takes away some of that fear then too, right? Like also feeling like, okay, yeah, there's other moms who have had postpartum depression and they're okay, like they're doing a great job. They're great moms. I think that's a big thing too, of just like, you can have these things and be struggling with them and still be a great parent.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's the biggest piece I want anyone to take from all of this, is just that like, you caring for yourself and doing what you need to do for yourself is what's best for your child. So, I think some people feel like, well, if I go to therapy, or if I go to a support group, or, if I'm taking medication, or, like I'm not being a good parent. And it's like, no, it's complete opposite of that. Like you are doing what you have to do so you can show up for your child, no matter how old they are or what they need. You're caring for yourself. And I think a big piece that I learned too is just like, my child deserves a happy and healthy mom. That's what he deserves. And so whatever I have to do to ensure that I can be that for him, that's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm. Oof, that's good. That is so good. Yeah. And I think the like power of having someone really see you in what your experience is important. And I think that's what happened with the doctor. I was like, oh, you don't see me in my experience and you're assuming something about me. And so now I feel that like I have to change or shift, right? And I think in your example, like, oh, she's really seeing me and allowing me to release this, allowing me to be like, I've been white knuckling it for 18 months and this is not okay, right? And so, yeah, it's like, it could be a therapist, it could be a mommy and me group, it could be your friend, it could be your mom, it could be anybody. There's co-regulation happening all around us, but we have to know like the education around it. And so do our partners and our other family members. Like, so anyone can take this course and be really helpful. I really want to ask this question, and I don't know if we should, but I want to talk about the scary postpartum depression psychosis that makes the news.
Yeah.
Like really heartbreaking things. And I just would love you to shed some light or education on, obviously we don't know what happened, right? But how can it get to that point? And does that feel very rare?
Yes. So I think we're hearing more about it in the media. So I think it's, I've honestly had a lot of clients be like, do I have postpartum psychosis because I think I'm going to drop my baby down the stairs? No. I think the biggest distinction that I could help people with in understanding it is if you have those thoughts and it scares you and, you do things, like sit on your butt and go down the stairs, right? Like that's not postpartum psychosis. That is anxiety, and again, I think there's a spectrum of all of those things. The part about psychosis is that, from what I've never had a client have that. So this is all from just learning and trainings, as well as just reading so much about it now because it is so much in the media. A lot of women, it looks like postpartum depression at the beginning. But what they find out a lot too is just they are having those thoughts, either suicidal or homicidal thoughts. So, my child would be better off if I wasn't here. Or I'm, to the extremes of, my child might sound silly, but like my child's the devil. And so I have to save everyone from my child. That is a psychotic thought. A lot of times too, moms, their characteristics change. So if they were maybe more of a quiet individual, their more erratic behaviors are going on, or vice versa. Maybe if they were a upbeat, go person, they just kind of go into this like comatose kind of like, so those are a lot of, there's more to it. There's tons of different symptoms, but those are some of the things too. And I think the biggest thing I would say about if that is a concern of yours or someone is that they need the first thing they need is immediate help. And you have to keep advocating for yourself or for your partner because it can be easily diagnosed as postpartum depression or anxiety. And I think it's so important I think that's a big piece that I think is so important is talking with your partner, talking with your spouse. What are you feeling? I kept a lot from my husband because I didn't want to appear that I couldn't do this, right? I didn't want to appear that I wasn't a great mom, right? But if you're experiencing those things, and it's hard for those moms, right, to say like, I want to kill myself or I want to kill my child, right? There's those fear of what's going to happen if I say that out loud. But if you are having those feelings, getting immediate help and keep telling somebody until someone helps you.
See, that's what's messed up. Like the system is failing. And we've talked about this before, but the system is failing. If I have to advocate for myself in that, I have to admit that out loud. I have to tell somebody I'm saying that. I'm sorry, I'm getting really fired up. And then they might not believe me, or I might not get the medication that I need or the help that I need because I'm going to the expert of like something is wrong or something is off in that, that just like blows my mind.
Yeah,
blows
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if you would, look more in depth to a lot of the stories we see on the media, how many times did they tell somebody they weren't feeling right? They weren't feeling, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but I think it's just, had someone not listened to me, had I not had the knowledge to like seek out somebody who had professional, training in this, I don't know what that, I mean, somebody could have just disregarded it as like, oh, it's just normal postpartum, right? So it like you said, it sucks that we have to advocate for ourselves and some people don't listen. And so I think that's why having these open conversations with anybody you can get to listen, anybody that you know will be a supportive person for you. And I think that's figuring that out even prior to giving birth, right? Like, who are those support people who can physically support you, but who can emotionally and mentally support you? You know, is there a friend you can call? They're a mom, an aunt. I always, you know, not that men don't know, but I just think if there's, you know, women who have gone through this, it's so important. And I've talked to my mom about, you know, postpartum depression. She's like, yeah, that wasn't a thing. And I was like, well, it was a thing. It was a thing 30 some years ago. It just wasn't talked about. And she's like, yeah, you just kept going. And I'm like, yeah, that's not okay. It's not okay.
Exactly. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, it's so interesting because when I hear the newsworthy psychosis one, I never blame the mom. I'm like, I understand how she got there. Like, it makes me so teary. Like, because I've had those thoughts, you know, like, oh, I'm like, oh, the baby's I can't get her to sleep. I'm like, go to freaking sleep. I'm going to lose my mind. I don't want to be here. Why are you here? You know, like I have just so much empathy for her in that. But again, we don't talk about that, or we can't talk about it, or we're afraid to talk about that or say that. And obviously I didn't get to that point, but I it's like a slippery slope in some way. I'm like, there's easy road there, not to scare people of like, you will get there. But I think there's just that, I think it just comes back to the lack of support of listening and believing women in their experience. And how do we support that instead of saying, you're fine.
Absolutely. Thank you for being so vulnerable, sharing that.
I get to be on this podcast.
Because it's heavy shit.
It is.
And just because we're not in the postpartum period anymore, you know, like I truly believe you're just postpartum for the rest of your life after you give birth. That's just my view of that. But, you know, it still affects you because that is such a scary experience to be like, why am I having these thoughts? And yeah, it can go one day from having those thoughts to the next day doing something. And it is such like an out of body experience to be like, these are not my thoughts, right? But you start to believe, and that's the big distinction too between psychosis and anxiety, is that you start to believe those are your thoughts, not some outside, you know, it's just the most terrible analogy that I give to all my clients, but I'm a visual person. It's the best thing I can visualize. You know those Mucinex commercials where there's like that green glob of mucus?
Uh-huh.
That's what I think of like anxiety. It's just like this little glob of mucus, like in your brain, like inserting all these anxious thoughts in your brain. And like, you can't get, you know, they start to become what you think you're thinking, right? And that's psychosis. That is, I'm having these thoughts and they are my thoughts. And the only way to get rid of the thoughts is, in most people's case, hurt myself, hurt a baby, hurt my child. And it is so sad that like, I want to talk about it more, right? And I'm so glad you did bring it up, because I think if you're aware that there can be help and it doesn't have to get to that place, then more women are going to be willing to speak up when they're feeling that way and can get the help. And it sucks that I have to tell you that you have to keep advocating for yourself and you have to keep telling people for someone to believe you. That absolutely sucks and is so messed up in so many ways. But that's going to help you and help your children and help your family. So just keep telling people. Keep telling people.
Yeah, and this is just a reminder for women, but this is also education for the system that supports us is to listen and ask.
Yeah. And if you as a support person don't know what to do with that, like, I've never had a client come in and tell me they're having those feelings, well, how would I react? I would be like, let's do whatever we got to do, let's make sure you're safe, number one, so if that's a hospital, whatever that all looks like, just help. Even if you don't know what to do to help that person, find someone else to help you, talk to a doctor, talk to a therapist, whatever that might look like.
Do you think PCI is or PSI is a good place for that?
Absolutely. They have a
or institute.
Yeah, Postpartum Support International. Took me forever to get that down. PSI, yes. It's postpartum.net is the website. And yes, they have, I think they call it like talk to an expert or talk to a mom. They've got, I believe they're 24/7 calls. They even have like survivors of psychosis support groups.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yes. So beautiful. Absolutely. So yes, huge. That's a wonderful outlet because those are people who know what to look for. If you're going to say, I want to kill myself, they're going to figure it out. They're going to do the things to help you. So yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. Absolutely. That is a wonderful, excellent resource.
Yeah. I just think as we're kind of wrapping up, kind of picturing this in like 3 stages of support, which is like pre-baby, like therapy, and then post, again, is therapy. And that's more of like mid-range postpartum anxiety, depression. And then there's the more intense psychosis, which is a help now, like we need help immediately. And so all of these, I mean, it'd be great if we can be in therapy before that and have kind of self-awareness and build support around that. But I think it's just the education of calling out the different stages of like the 2 first stages are therapists or people that are certified in perinatal mental health, medicine or psychiatry. The last stage is a help now, get medication or hospitalization or something, or a lot of advocacy at that stage. And so again, I think the course does a really good job of that spectrum and like really explicitly talking about the lines of when it is important to seek help. And I love that we can just talk about it openly here and our experiences. And I hope this has been really helpful to everyone out there. I know it's been helpful to me. And even if you've already given birth, you haven't given birth, you're about to give birth, like it's still almost like you can reprocess anything or allow yourself to go back if you need to go back. Give yourself permission to, I guess.
Absolutely. I think there's not a time period that you can never go back and process thoughts, feelings, traumas. There's not we only got 5 years. No, like you can do it at any point in time and then it's healing.
Yeah.
And it's a journey. It's a process. And it's hard work, but it's worth it.
And you don't have to do it alone.
You do not have to do it alone.
Kristine, you're the best. Okay, girl, tell people where they can find you. What are you working on? Tell us everything.
Absolutely. So not the best at social media. So I have an Instagram, there's some things out there. I'm going to get better. I promise.
That's all right.
So
you're doing
Instagram,
the real work behind, I know.
Yes. My website, I know, Jen's going to provide that information. So yeah, you can reach out to me via my website or email. I can see clients in Kansas, and I provide teletherapy, individual counseling for moms, parents, whatever that might look like. But if you're not in Kansas, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to guide you through Postpartum Support International, or if I know other therapists, perinatal workers in other states, I'd be more than happy to help. I'm very passionate about it and I want everyone to seek the help out. So please reach out. Absolutely. So yeah, I do. So I'm a stay-at-home mom by day, a therapist by the night.
Yes.
So I am
24/7 worker, as I like.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yep. I am currently working on, because I think the big piece that is so important to me is just planning for the possibilities. So I'm working on a postpartum plan that any postpartum plan I ever saw did not include anything about mental health. And so that's a big thing that I want moms to think about and have those conversations with spouses, partners prior to get some of these things in place. Granted, it's not going to make everything go seamless, but it could help. And it's just more awareness and more knowledge. So I'm working on that. So check back to my website and hopefully I will have that out soon. I also provide trainings to agencies, corporations, just anybody who works within the perinatal field, just to talk more and again, provide more knowledge about what those postpartum emotions can look like and just how to help moms more.
You're doing good work, girl. Kristine, thank you so much for being on here. I really appreciate it. Loved our conversation, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to our show. We hope you heard our birth stories and experiences and felt the need to share yours in all of its validity. If you felt a little tug that you might need more support, check out Kristen's course, Postpartum Emotions, on the How We Get Through app, which is available for both Android and iPhone. Next week on the podcast, we are going into the tween world. You know, that weird spot when they're not a kid, but they're not a teen. A real Britney Spears vibe, you know, not a girl, yet not a woman. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Dr. Leah joins us in understanding the tween stage and how you and your partner can be on the same page when parenting in such a transitional phase. Make sure you subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. Thank you. We'll see you then.